be seated. I want to welcome you to the memorial service for James Wallace Moore, or as most of us knew him, Jim. Memorial services are an interesting time. They're a time in which we remember a loved one. They're a time in which we also celebrate his life, we support his family, we take time to mourn. They're also a time when we symbolically worship one last time with a beloved member of our community. So I want to invite you in whatever way you feel comfortable to participate and be part of the service. I want to invite you to sing the hymns with us, have times of prayer, or just to sit there in silence. In whatever way, I want to welcome you here to take this time to remember one who is so dear to us. Welcome.
Would you join me in the call to worship? The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?
The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?
God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble.
Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea.
Wait for the Lord. Be strong, and let your heart take courage.
Wait for the Lord.
For the everlasting God is our refuge.
And underneath are the everlasting arms.
Let us pray. Dear God, creator and sustainer of the universe, we are here today to honor the memory of your servant, Jim Moore, who truly believed the words of the scriptures we have just recited. I pray that everything that is said and done in this memorial service might honor and glorify you, the source of Jim's strength and faith. Everyone here today knew Jim in different relationships and different periods of his life, and each of us has different memories of our time spent with him. We are all better for having known him, and I pray that each one of us will see you as the source of our strength and salvation, just as he did. We ask these things in your holy name. Amen.
Later in this service, we will be singing Martin Luther's stirring hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." I am reading from Psalm 46, the psalm that inspired his words. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. He says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress." Martin Luther was inspired by this psalm, but he also had first-hand experience with a fortress. He spent almost a year in the Wartburg, out of reach of those authorities within the church who wanted to extinguish his voice. He understood that a fortress provides shelter, but more importantly, that it is a place of safety and protection. The psalmist confidently proclaims that God is our fortress, our place of refuge when life takes turns that threaten to overwhelm us. Jim was an engineer and understood the importance of foundation in holding up to wear and tear. He understood that faith in God is the solid foundation upon which to build a life. He also knew that faith in God is not a magic charm that prevents anything bad from happening to us or to the people that we love. Rather, it is an approach to life, an understanding that even when life deals us the worst, God is our strength. We do not face the giants alone, but rather with God at our side. He understood, too, that faith has to be lived out. It's not just a head thing. It's the daily choice to love God first, to go where He leads, and to choose His way over any other way that presents itself, to listen to His voice over any other that whispers in our ear. Jim left his wheelchair behind on July 4th and walked through heaven's gates upright and without need of assistance. It was a true Independence Day for him. For a person like him who valued his independence, that was a happy day. He's found new scenes to paint, and he's already poking around looking for things that need fixing or improving. James Wallace Moore lived his long life well and is at home in the place that was prepared for him by the Lord he trusted and served. May that knowledge bring you, his family, who will miss him most, comfort and peace as you learn to live with the hole in your lives that his absence creates. May his example of faithful living continue to inspire and encourage each of us as we continue our journeys through life.
Been a while since I've had to give a speech in front of a large audience, and this particular one I want to do a good job on, so bear with me if I stumble a little bit. Although some people are going to speak about Jim's interactions in long terms and projects that endured, I'm going to speak in detail as a perspective of one of Jim's first undergraduate students in the early 60s. Most of what I will describe is about how my career unfolded. But the most important part is not my career, but Jim's role at critical decision points in guiding me through it. The interactions were often brief, but their effects were profound and far-reaching, as you will see. I entered the UVA engineering program in the fall of 1961, the first in my family to go to college. Jim and several other new professors arrived later in the early 60s, and he became my faculty advisor. Jim, any of you who knew him will understand, Jim had a very quiet but self-assured way of teaching that the students responded to. They respected him. He was well thought of, and they were inspired to do well in his courses. Jim often gave the students an exam with, say, 7 questions on it. And you could choose to answer any 4, which meant you could tailor your answer to what you knew best. He later told me that if a student could answer any 4 of the 7, he knew the material well enough to pass. None of my other professors did exams this way, and the students thought it very fair of him to use this method. I learned an interesting perspective from Jim during an engineering lab he conducted. We were to assemble an experimental device and make measurements to validate a theory we had learned in class. Jim wanted you to complete the experiment, write the report, and turn it in before you left. The experiment went well. I wrote it up and turned it into him. As he took it, he said, "How did it go?" I said, "It went exactly as we planned." His reply was, "Well, you didn't learn anything new then. You learn something new when you make mistakes." I thought that odd. Aren't we supposed to get it right? As a 19-year-old, I thought this odd, but it took me years to realize the significance of it. Fast forward 20 years. I'm in a lab designing a new instrument to measure the phase transition temperatures of a phospholipid cell membrane. I thought it was a straightforward design. When I ran the first experiment, it didn't work as expected, and I thought, I'm going to need to learn something new here. And his odd statement suddenly made sense. He had the perspective as a teacher that I did not have as a 19-year-old inexperienced engineer, and he was passing it on to me for use later in life. Back to the 60s in engineering school. I progressed through my studies, and in the spring of 1965, I was in the last semester of my 4-year education, that penultimate goal all undergraduates have. 1965 was a very good year for engineers. The companies would come to UVA to interview you, and if things looked promising, you could get a free trip to the company on their dime. I went on one of these trips to a company that designed large generators. As we toured the plant, we entered a large windowless room with what appeared to be hundreds of fluorescent lights in the ceiling and 20 to 30 identical drafting tables with engineers busy at work. We spoke to several of the men, and they were happy and excited about the work they were doing. But as I looked at this situation, I got this strange feeling that this was not where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. 2 other company visits yielded similar results, and I wondered what my 4-year education had prepared me for. As the semester proceeded, most of my friends had accepted job offers and were anxious to finally start making some money. I was still uncertain what to do. Later that spring, I was doing some work in the engineering school library in Thornton Hall. I left the library in the mid-afternoon and came down the steps to the main corridor. Thornton Hall is one of those beautiful old buildings with magnificent tall windows. On that sunny afternoon, they were bathing the main corridor in a warm afternoon glow. As I walked toward the exit, I saw Jim come into the dean's office and walk toward me. As he approached, he said, "How are your job interviews going?" I explained to him the quandary I'd found myself in. In a moment that was to have an epic effect on my career, he said, "Would you consider staying on for a master's degree with a fully paid scholarship for 2 years?" I had never even considered graduate school as an option. At that time, a master's degree entailed a year of coursework and a year for a thesis. The coursework was the hardest I had ever encountered, and I thought I had finally reached the limits of my intellectual capability. For the thesis, Jim suggested I work with some electrical engineering students who were working on a device to read printed words and convert them into electrical signals. Eventually, they would need a way to convert the electrical signals into a form that a blind reader could understand. Jim gave me the task to convert the signal into a Braille output that a Braille reader could recognize with his finger. The design of the device to push the small pistons into the finger of the reader was obvious and straightforward. But I reached an impasse in trying to decide how far to push into the finger and what spacing should be used to allow the reader to discern 2 dots from 1 dot. None of my engineering background could help me here. Jim sent me to spend 3 weeks in the medical school library looking for answers. With the help of an excellent reference librarian and 2 med students who took an interest in the project, I found the information I needed and finished the design. I found the physiological parameters in the engineering project absolutely fascinating. During this time, Jim asked me then to put out a notice on the upcoming events board about a lecture by an officer in the United States Public Health Service about the future role of engineering in medical care. The topic of the lecture appealed to me. I went to the lecture and I asked the speaker about the United States Public Health Service. The Public Health Service was starting to recruit engineers. They took mostly doctors, but they were recruiting engineers to work with the doctors in the healthcare field. I applied for a commission in the U.S. Public Health Service, and after I graduated, I was inducted as a lieutenant JG. My duty station was the National Institutes of Health in their biomedical engineering and instrumentation branch. Here, the engineers were allowed to work on with any investigator they could show how engineering technology could be used to help solve medical problems. My engineering background was more than adequate, but my life science background was virtually non-existent. I had never even had biology. At NIH, I met an engineer who had just finished his PhD at UVA in a new joint venture between the engineering school and a medical school called bioengineering. He was returning as a faculty member and persuaded me to enter the program. The program was very rewarding as I took every course in the life sciences they would let me take and still pay for my education, which took a number of years. It took 7 years, but it was the most wonderful 7 years I've ever had. After receiving my PhD, I returned to NIH. This was how I ended up working with cell membranes I described earlier. Among all these details of my journey, we shouldn't lose sight of how it began. On a sunny afternoon in Thornton Hall, when Jim Moore asked me, "How are your job interviews going?"
The Moore and the McVeigh families attended the same large church in Indianapolis, but didn't meet until we attended the same church in Lafayette, Indiana. But we really didn't become acquainted until we met in Charlottesville, again attending the same church. It turns out that wives Doris and Lexi grew up quite close to each other in southern Kentucky. Our children were about the same ages and swam competitively on the same team. We camped together many times and shared the ownership of a house on the back bay at Sandbridge, Virginia. We built sailboats in the Moore's basement that our children learned to sail, and we both had catamarans. We had great fun together 2 or 3 times in Hawaii and several times in different parts of Europe. Due to Jim's service in England and France during World War II, he was a great tour guide planner. Dr. Moore and I were very close professionally in a major research area. We both did our doctoral dissertations at Purdue University a year or 2 apart in what is called automatic control. We took several similar or identical courses, even though Jim was a mechanical engineer and I was electrical. Automatic control is very mathematical, and it doesn't matter what discipline you're in after a mathematical description is established, so our joining together was ideal. Together, we established the Automatic Control Laboratory for Research at the university and immediately obtained as much research funding as we could handle. Dr. Moore published many important papers. Of special note is the International Automatic Control Congress that meets every 4 years, where Jim published research papers in London, Paris, Budapest. Only the most important research is accepted at these conferences. He also was a leader in the Mechanical Engineering Control Society. As an example of Dr. Moore's research accomplishments during 10 years of research for NASA was the development of an exceedingly sensitive force measurement system. The most important factor in its development was the design of an air-bearing mounted platform, which, as you can imagine, was virtually frictionless. NASA was so delighted that they put the device on display. Dr. Moore was the major professor and mentor for several doctoral students, some of whom became engineering professors, as well as many master's candidates. It's been a privilege to have been associated with Jim and his family, and he'll be missed by many.
Well, you've heard about my father as a teacher, a colleague, and a good friend. Now let me tell you what he was really like at home as a husband and father. He was exactly the same. Dad had an unshakable faith in the ability for humans to solve problems. And from his early youth, he was a hands-on engineer. His parents learned this one day when they looked out from their living room window and found their car in pieces along their whole front yard. And yes, he got it all back together again. That was before you could get manuals for that stuff. I recall Dad would converse with me the same way he would converse with anyone else. He would patiently listen and observe. He'd talk very little, but always be poised for the right moment to grin and voice a short, Socratic-style question or observation. When I was first home on break from college, I passionately lectured him on the certainty that PCB pollution would destroy almost all living things on Earth within 20 years. After half an hour of this, he said very calmly, "Innovation will take care of that." And then he'd wait. And if your look of befuddlement didn't subside, he would add just a little more information. That time he said, smog was a horrible and unsolvable problem. Then a French guy invented a way to convert car exhaust into carbon dioxide and water. And that's what we now call catalytic converters. And that huge problem was solved. On another break, I confronted him on the necessity for socialism. After an hour or more of this, he simply said, "Equality is not the key to happiness." And then much later he added, "Productivity is the key to happiness." Dad was productive. In addition to constantly moonlighting for needed funds and with NASA and investigating auto crash failures, he completed many hobby projects of which his family was the beneficiary. For example, building a sailboat or 2 sailboats with Gene in our basement, and designing, along with Gene and other engineers, a perfectly functional and very unattractive beach house. All of the families enjoyed many hours of this beach house, even if all of the showers measured only 2 feet 10-inch square. And now you probably think I'm guilty of hero worshiping, and I am a little bit, but Dad did have his faults. He was not overly affectionate. He was not a hugger. He didn't dote on all of his children or his grandchildren. But we knew he loved us, and he was always there for us. But how do you bring up those examples you're supposed to convince you that he was real and all that, when I can testify that I've never seen him drink alcohol. I've never heard him speak ill or mean-spirited about another person, ever. Perhaps in an angry spirit, but never in a mean spirit. And I never heard him use a bad word. I don't think this level of success on his part would be possible without the division of labor that was common in Dad's generation. Mom was expected to raise us and manage the house, but she always knew that she had married an engineer. One night, Mom and Dad drove home late through a heavy snow. The snow cleared to reveal a huge moon rising from the road ahead. This was so romantic that Mom placed her hand on Dad's arm. "Oh, dear, look." Dad glanced back into her eyes. "Yes, this is the perfect night to launch a Ranger satellite to the moon." So in summary, Dad was patient, kind, trusting, dependable, industrious, and very honest. He was not easily angered and did not envy or speak poorly of others. He treated everyone the same, as if they had value and worth, and he taught us that belief. Thank you for being here to share in his remembrance.
Jim Moore was a man who was deeply loved. We can know that just in the large regard his family held him in. We can hear it in the fine words that have been spoken about him today. And I can see it in all those, in part, in all those who come to mourn and celebrate his life. I only had the privilege of knowing Jim for the past 2 years as he struggled with his health. So the much I know of Jim's life has come through conversations with his family and friends. One of the things that amazed me so much about Jim was his large capacity for knowledge. Of course, Jim knew a whole lot about his discipline. I found out Jim also knew a whole lot about painting. And as I've heard from his friends, Jim knew a whole lot about humor, possessing a dry wit that would always elicit an unexpected laugh at a comment he would make. But what's also, I think, incredible about Jim is that he knew a whole lot about life. He knew what it meant to be a caring father. He knew what it meant to be a loving husband. He knew what it meant to be a thoughtful neighbor to his community. And he knew what it meant to be a good friend to many of the people he met. Jim left a great impact. And that impact can be seen in the people in this room, and that impact can be seen in the legacy that his life has left. And so for this reason, I know that Jim will be greatly missed. Jim's loss is hard on us. While his suffering has ended, we will still miss him. We will miss seeing him around. We will miss the conversations, the time we have spent. We'll just miss his presence. And this is hard. For as the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians, we see now only through a mirror dimly. We want to get to the point where we can proudly proclaim, as Paul would later say, O death, where is thy sting? O death, where is thy victory? But maybe today we are not there yet. And I think that is okay. We can have space to mourn, and we know that God and Jesus, who wept for his friend, mourns with us. But no matter where we are today, I hope that we can rest in the truth that Jim, through the faithfulness of Jesus and Jim's faith in Jesus, rest in God's hands now. Jim now knows of God's love, because for while we only know in part here in this world, Jim now knows of this love in full. So yes, we remember and mourn Jim no longer being with us here on this earth. But in the coming days, as we tell stories, laugh at memories, weep at the hard times, and carry on with life, may we do so knowing that we have hope that we will be with Jim once again. So may this day be an occasion for mourning, an occasion for remembering, but also a time for hope. We will miss Jim. We will miss all that he knows. But we look forward to a time when he can tell us all the new things he has found out. We give Jim now into God's hands. And we are thankful for the time that we have been able to spend with him. Would you please join me in the singing of our final hymn? You can find it in 334 in your hymn. stories of someone's life can never be summed up in just one service. And so, in the coming days, we will hopefully tell stories and times we knew of Jim. In light of this, the family would like to invite you to join in a reception afterwards. We'll have some food outside, and the family will be waiting to talk. But this hopefully will also be a time for you to share stories, the times you knew of Jim, the memories you have, but also to provide support to his family, his friends, and those mourning his loss. I would invite you, after the family has left, to please stand up and go outside to talk with them. The only thing is if we could please move a little over, as we'll be moving some tables over here. With that being said, I'd like to speak these final words, that as we leave this place, may we rest in the words of Jesus, who said, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me shall live, even though they die." So we commend Jim into the Father's hands and hope to join him someday in that great cloud of witnesses. Amen. Please stay standing.